So what's the first thing you think about when you think about Bigfoot? Probably the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, Washington State, redwood forests of California, maybe Canada. There are Bigfoot stories in the Southeast that go back centuries. The Seminole tribe in what is now Florida called him Esti Kapkaki, which means the cannibal giant. In 1818, in Apalachicola, Florida, people reported a Bigfoot creature stealing from their food caches and stalking fishermen. Even today, Florida has the legend of the skunk ape. Louisiana has the Honey Island swamp monster. Arkansas has the Boggy Creek monster. Relatively recently, two campers near the Chattahoochee River in North Georgia reported that they were terrorized by a Bigfoot creature. They were so terrified that one of the men actually fired his weapon, and they later called 911 to report it. A local reporter heard the story a few days later and went to the area to see if he could find any proof. What he did find was that the campers left their tent and all of their camping equipment behind. Here in Western North Carolina, there are dozens of reports ranging from unknown vocalizations and noises all the way up to full-blown sightings. I've never put a lot of stock into those stories of a Bigfoot creature in the Southeast. It's just too populated. And then about 15 years ago, I had an experience about a mile from where I'm standing. I was here to fly fish, and I heard a sound from up kind of almost inaccessible forest. It's very steep. It's covered in rhododendrons. It's almost impossible to move through. There was a sound that I have never been able to explain. It was a guttural howl, but it was not like a wolf or a coyote. It was more like an ape. It was that sort of deep, bellowing yell, and it very deeply on a primal level frightened me. I've always been a little bit more open-minded since then. The reason that I'm here is because several years ago there was a Bigfoot report, and it was compelling to me. Two men came up from Atlanta, both professionals, both what you would consider credible witnesses. One was a doctor, one was a lawyer. They came here to meet their sons who are in college to do a day of hiking, and they were hiking on a different trail than this. They were hiking on a trail called the Flat Laurel Creek Trail. They saw a dark shape in the trail. They assumed it was a bear, so everybody froze. A couple of minutes later, it became aware of their presence and stood up. It became immediately obvious that it was not a bear. They described it as being between 7 and 8 feet tall, bipedal, essentially shaped like a person, but completely covered in dark hair. It didn't really react to them other than to give them a look and then disappear into the bushes. A researcher showed up here 2 days after that happened, and they didn't find any prints, but they did find lots of broken branches going off into the woods. I decided not to do the Flat Laurel Creek Trail. This is downriver from that, and the reason I chose this is because my assumption is if there is an animal like a Bigfoot that can live here, it's going to want to stay far away from people. And Laurel Creek Trail, especially this time of year, is crowded. I did a little research on the map, and I kind of zeroed in on a spot that seems to be accessible to me, but not frequently visited. I think that'll give me my best chance at actually finding anything. So the plan today is to hike up, keeping my eyes open for any sort of evidence. And now I'm by no means a Bigfoot expert, but I do know from the literature that obviously you're looking for footprints. You're also looking for branches that are broken off, sort of in a twisting motion rather than a breaking motion. That seems to be kind of a Bigfoot signature thing to do. Also looking for structures. It appears that Bigfoot likes to lean up branches and limbs and logs to be able to get out of the weather. We're gonna keep our eyes open for anything that kind of looks out of the ordinary. And then the last part of the day will be, we're gonna set a camera trap here, and I'll leave it for a week and come back and see if we catch anything. This trail is beating me. It's covered in leaves and it's wet, and I've fallen more times than I can count. I've seen several places that I'd love to stop and set up my camera, but they're literally so hard to get to that I don't think it's safe. So I'm really looking for a game trail, something that I can follow and not just bushwhack. But so far it's been kind of a nightmare of a hike. So I have found what I believe to be a very steep game trail. It's barely visible, especially with the leaves. It leads up and away from the creek, up into the higher part of the mountain here and into the rhododendron more specifically, which, if you've hiked any out here, you know rhododendron is like the best place in the world for a bear or something to hide. It's great cover. They're so dense here that typically can go into a rhododendron thicket in the rain and not get wet. So I'm going to keep moving up. I'm not going to go too much further. Hopefully I can find a good spot where I can set up my camera and put out some bait and see what happens. So I followed the game trail. I've come to a kind of a clearing on a ridge. And I think this is where I'm going to put my game camera. There seems to be a lot of cover up here. It's completely surrounded by rhododendron on three sides. But there's also lots of acorns. It's open, it's relatively close to water, so this seems like this would be a good habitat. If you want to catch a Bigfoot on camera, you have to know what Bigfoot eat. For an animal that may or may not exist, there's a lot of information about what they eat on the internet. It basically boils down to two categories: meat and sweet, which is also kind of what I eat. So to that end, I brought trout. This is actually caught nearby. Also heard that they really enjoy donuts, so I brought a donut. I also brought a honey bun because if it's a true southern Bigfoot, he'll eat a honey bun. So I am back here on Flat Laurel Creek. It's been a few days since I set the camera, so I'm gonna go up and try to retrieve it, see if we got anything. So I finally made it back to the spot where I left the game cam, and it's still here, so that's a good sign. And the bait is gone, so that's a good sign. I'm gonna poke around right under the tree where I had hung the trout and see if anything is obvious. I think there's very little chance of finding any sort of print because the leaves are so thick, but we'll see if we see anything else. I don't know how well this will show up on camera, but it definitely, there's what appears to be a trail that goes now from the tree where I hung the bait back down towards the water, and it actually looks like something fairly large went through, and this was not here a week ago when I put the trap cameras. So I'm back to the trail cam. Can't find the string anywhere. I see no signs of bait. I see no visible signs other than that trail that I didn't see last week, but I don't see any sort of prints or fur or anything like that. So hopefully we got something on the camera, and it's still on. Hopefully that's a good sign. So I'm back on the lower end of Flat Laurel Creek. I was here last week. I put up a game camera and some bait. Came back after 4 days. The bait was gone. It looked like my twine had been broken. The camera was still here, so I took the camera home. expecting maybe raccoons, or best case scenario was a bear. I got home and loaded my memory card, and I had exactly 2 clips on my game camera. I had me setting up the game camera and me taking down the game camera. So there were 4 days in between where something took my bait but didn't trigger the camera. I'm not sure why. The camera seems to be working fine. I strapped it to a tree in my yard and it picked up everything for 24 hours. So I'm not saying it's paranormal. I'm not saying that Bigfoot knows how to turn off the game camera. In the sake of doing a thorough investigation, I decided to come back and put the camera back up. I think I'm actually going to go up the ridge a little bit higher than I put the last camera. It looks like at the top of the ridge, this clearing runs into a rhododendron thicket, which would be good cover for an animal. So my plan is to go up there and kind of put my camera right on the edge of the two. So I'll see things coming in and out of the thicket. I brought the same bait for the most part as I brought last time. I have some trout. I have some donuts. So we'll hook everything up and come back in a week. It's tough for most of us to imagine that there can be something big like Bigfoot living out here and that we wouldn't know about it. We go home, we go to work, we go to the grocery store. We're constantly surrounded by people, and we're constantly surrounded by the signs that would indicate that we have conquered this world, that there is nothing left to be discovered. Just here in Western North Carolina, we have the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. It's 800 square miles. We have Pisgah National Forest, which is where I am today. It's 801 square miles. Nantahala National Forest, 830 square miles. We have state parks, and we have lots of tracts of just undeveloped land. And when you think about it in those terms, that there's at least a couple of thousand square miles of wild forest, it's a little easier to imagine that something could be here. Now, do I believe that Bigfoot lives in Western North Carolina? My gut says no. My heart says yes. And that's why I bring donuts to the woods. It would be interesting to find. One of the things that I discovered during my research for this was that several years ago there was a PhD candidate at Penn State named Joshua Stevens who mapped every sighting of Bigfoot from 1921 until he did his map, which I think was in 2012. And there were 3,313 individual sightings. Now, he identified clusters. Obviously, the Pacific Northwest was the big one. The Ohio River Valley, Central Florida, the Sierra Nevada Mountains, and the Mississippi River Valley. Now, his map included sightings here in Western North Carolina. So, again, it's impossible for me to say something doesn't live here. There's food, there's water, there's shelter, there's a lot of wild space. I think it would be difficult. But that's why we're out here hunting, right? I do want to say I haven't said much about this trail because it's not a trail. It's a game trail on a good day. So if you're really interested in where I am, it's probably pretty easy to figure out from watching the video if you're familiar with this area. I'm not going to give a lot of detail because it is tough to get into. It appears like it's going to be tough to get out of. Ow. I will say that the initial sighting that brought me up here this week was on Flat Laurel Creek, which is the creek that's below me, but it also continues all the way up the mountain. Closer to the top is an actual trail called the Flat Laurel Creek Trail, and it is fantastic. I've done it several times. It works really well as a 2-car shuttle, so you can have one person park at the top on Black Balsam Road and another person park at the bottom on Highway 215, and you can walk it either up or down. If you start at Black Balsam, it's mostly downhill. If you start on 215, it's mostly uphill, but it's never super steep. It's kind of a constant, steady grade, and it is one of my favorite hikes up here. And had every intention to actually hike that and put my game camera on Flat Laurel Creek. But every day that I've been able to get here, it has been insanely busy, to the point that I couldn't find anywhere to park nearby. So this is also Flat Laurel Creek, and in the interest of looking for Bigfoot, I did make the assumption that I might have better luck somewhere a little more remote. Plan would be at some point to actually go to the Flat Laurel Creek Trail where the sighting occurred as best I can determine and put a camera there. And that may happen over the winter. So there may be an update to this video in a couple of months. So I wanted to do a quick update. It took almost 2 months for me to return to get my camera. Combination of schedule issues, and we've had some bad weather. We've had a lot of cold and snow, which made the river that you have to cross almost impassable, at least safely. I finally made it back up. My camera was still there, although the batteries were dead. I brought it home and plugged it in, and I only had one clip on it, which was me setting up the bait. Again, I put batteries in it, put it up in the backyard. It'll pick up a squirrel, it'll pick up a bird. It works in daylight, it works in the dark. Everything seems to be fine. So I have no idea what's causing it to do that. It had been so long, there was obviously no sign of my bait, no sign of the string that I used to hang it, so this doesn't seem to be conclusive. All that it means for me is that I don't know how to catch Bigfoot. I can't prove that he's not there, and my plan is to go back to Flat Laurel Creek in the spring and set up probably 2 cameras. I found a couple of good spots that I want to try, but until the weather warms up, it's pretty hard to get up there. I may try and go back sooner if we have a few warm days, but there are a couple of pretty big creek crossings that are hard to do when there's ice. I have been reading some articles about Bigfoot sightings in North Georgia, which is only about an hour and a half from where I am. So that might be another potential place that I want to go check out in the spring. For now, at least, I'm going to call an end to the Bigfoot hunt and get on to some other investigations.